This content is being brought to you by the Bourbon Real Talk American Whiskey Aroma Kit. This is a tool that I put together to help all you whiskey aficionados out there develop your palates. You can sit down with the vials and train your senses, or you can sit down with a great dram and break that whiskey down to its components. If you have any interest of purchasing a kit of your own, head on over to bourbonrealtalk.com/shop and pick one up. Thank you for listening. Hello, everybody out there listening to this Bourbon Real Talk podcast. We have a very exciting guest on the show today, Wade Woodard of tatertalk.com and what I refer to generally as the label police. Is that fair?
I active in making sure people are compliant with federal code on labeling.
Yes. Yeah. So when I tried to describe to people who I was coming to interview, I'm like, well, he's kind of like the self-proclaimed label police. Like he's kind of a consumer protection advocate.
I am the Ralph Nader.
The Ralph Nader of whiskey. There you go. That's right. I do remember hearing that someplace. So came over to Wade's house, and we are going to try a little bit of whiskey. So what have you got for us here?
Well, this is not whiskey.
I do that every time.
But it's one of my favorite Texas distilled products. It's made by Balcones. This is Rumble. This one in particular is their cask reserve, so it's a much higher proof than their standard Rumble offering. Mm-hmm. It's distilled from all Texas products, carbonado sugar, figs, and honey.
Yep.
So I think personally it tastes somewhat of a cross between a whiskey and a rum. So
yeah, I've told people it's like if whiskey and a brandy and a rum had a baby. Yeah, it's got a little bit of all that characteristic. And our club, Someone Say Whiskey, has 2 single barrel selects of this coming out, supposedly sometime in January, but you can't always tell when they're actually going to be available. So,
and Houston Bourbon Society picked a couple of barrels as well the week before you. So
yeah, we were not the first, unfortunately. And that was partially my fault because I had the ability to schedule sooner. And I didn't do it. And then I was talking with Christopher about something, and he said, "Oh, I'm going to be in the car with Wade. We're headed up to Balcones to pick." And I was like, God dang it. I lost. I wanted to be the first.
They had a lot of interesting variations of this Rumble to pick from. So I'm sure both groups got something good.
Yeah.
But, they played around with this in some various barrel finishings that were really unique.
So on this one, I get a lot of like dark dried fruit. And then a good bit of chocolate and cinnamon. You get anything particular in this? Toffee, yeah. A lot of caramelized sugar flavors. Coffee, caramel, butterscotchy. A little less butterscotchy, more toffee, since it's a little bit smoky.
Add a little water to it, actually.
Yeah, it's good.
This one's 64.9, that particular one.
Yeah. So wanted to come talk with you a little bit today because you are extremely involved in the whiskey community, and you have a phenomenal collection, many of which are bottles that you would have had to have purchased before the whiskey craze started. So somehow you had some predictive ability to know what was going to be a taterific, like extra special bottle in the future.
More dumb luck. When I first got into collecting whiskey, there was no secondary market to speak of whatsoever. So the guys like me that were in it, I was kind of got in it in the very early 2000s. We were buying whiskey because we wanted to drink it. And if we bought 3 bottles of a BTAC from a particular year, it's because we thought that year's release was very good. So next year's release is going to be different. Might as well go ahead and buy 2 or 3 of each.
Right.
And they were easy to find then. They were $39.99 a bottle,
and people would ship sometimes back then, so you could get a hold of stuff. And
back then, cost plus shipping was, matter of fact, they didn't even call it cost plus shipping because people just helped each other out. There wasn't even that name to it.
Right,
It
right.
was just, hey, Wade, you have this in your area. Will you send me a bottle and help friends out?
That's awesome. When you were growing up, was there drinking in your household, or was it like drinking was kind of a taboo subject?
My parents weren't big drinkers. They drank some beer, occasional bottle of wine, but they were never really whiskey or spirits drinkers. Occasional margarita. It wasn't taboo, but it wasn't a lot of drinking going on.
Right. I find it interesting. A lot of people in the industry and people who've gotten really involved in this hobby. There's a number of them that I've talked to that they came from teetotaler houses, and it's like, how did this happen? You have hundreds and hundreds of bottles of whiskey now, or you make whiskey, so I always find that to be kind of an interesting question. So you started collecting, you said, in the early 2000s. When you first got started, like, what drew you into it?
I'd always liked whiskey. I mean, even in college, I was drinking probably what was really good Weller whiskey with Coke back then. But post college, started drinking more whiskey on the rocks, which led to eventually drinking whiskey neat. Probably a typical kind of transition path for a lot of people. But wanted to know more about the bottles I was drinking. I mean, back then, you picked up a bottle in Knob Creek and it said it was distilled at the Knob Creek Distillery.
Right.
Nowadays, anybody that's into whiskey knows, okay, this is
Beam.
really a Jim Beam product. But back then, when I got into it, the internet was early on. This information wasn't widely known in the public whatsoever that Knob Creek was a Jim Beam product.
Right.
So I found a site that was started, I think, in around 2000, straightbourbon.com, and it's still there. And the guy who started the site set up a forum section. So kind of the original kind of bourbon geeks all hung out on this bourbon section. I mean, Chuck Cowdery was an early on member. Michael Beach was there early on. So that's where I first learned that, hey, there is no Knob Creek Distillery.
Right,
this is really a Jim Beam product.
Right.
And so trying to figure that out back then was a lot different world than it is today.
And so what caused you to make that transition to actually studying the labeling laws?
That came much later, actually. The birth of Texas whiskey started in 2009 with Garrison Brothers and Balcones opening up pretty similar type things. Garrison Brothers was the first to start distilling Texas whiskey. Balcones was the first to release it because they released a product longer. But they were both right there, and now they're both 10 years old. But after those guys got started, and I met Dan and met back then Chip Tate, realized how much hard work and sweat that they're putting into it and money to make whiskey truly grain to glass here in Texas. And then 2011, 2012, their products are getting out there, but then you start seeing some, I call them makers versus fakers. And the fakers were buying bulk whiskey from out of state, bringing it down here, and they were putting it in a bottle. And I realized that this was not true Texas whiskey. And I wondered how they were getting away with some of this thing. So I started digging into some of the laws and seeing, are there any requirements for these guys to actually say where this whiskey came from? And digging into the code, I found 27 CFR 5.36D that basically was very clear that if you source whiskey from out of state and you bottled it in another state for certain whiskey types, not for blended whiskeys or spirit whiskeys, but for your basic bourbon or rye, the stated distillation actually had to be on the label. And many of these Texas companies were not adhering to that standard.
Right.
And so that's when I got involved in reporting it some to the TTB, but also kind of calling it out online when I saw it, commenting on newspaper articles. Let's just say a few of those companies, I became public enemy number one because I was shedding light on what they were doing.
Which was basically lying to make money. That's what I consider it, right? If you call something, because the reality is companies have realized that if you say that a product has a geographical association, that the people that are loyal to that geography, they're going to buy it. Biagio got in trouble for Templeton and Tin Cup.
What did Biagio get in trouble? Templeton was their own company, so that was not a Biagio product. Tin Cup is owned by Constellation.
Oh, maybe it was Constellation.
Yeah, it was Constellation.
But one was saying it was Iowa whiskey, one was saying it was Colorado.
Right.
And
in both cases, they really came from
MGP. Yeah. And so, I think that story is what first brought to light to me as a consumer that there was a lot of deception out there in the marketplace.
Templeton story was the first one that really kind of made national headlines and kind of brought a focus on this plant in Indiana, MGP, that was selling bulk whiskey to so many other people.
Mm-hmm.
So that kind of got that word out there. And there's nothing wrong with, let's get this on the record, there's nothing wrong with sourcing whiskey. It's long been an established practice, but as long as you're upfront and honest about it.
Right.
I look at companies like High West and Smooth Ambler. They were very honest about what they were doing with the whiskey they were sourcing and labeling it properly, and had been very successful. So.
Right. So along those lines, so you were you already working for Garrison Brothers whenever you started researching? No. So you started before that.
I started before that.
Yeah. And so when you first dug into it, what were the main violations that were just flagrant?
The two that really stood out was this violation of the stated distillation that we talked about,
mm-hmm.
but also all American whiskeys, all of whiskeys sold in America that are under 4 years old require an age statement by code.
Mm-hmm.
This even refers to blend. The blended component of it actually has to have an age statement. So I realize in addition to these products not being actually distilled in Texas, they weren't 4 years old and they didn't have an age statement. So there's kind of two violations there.
Gotcha.
And to date, I see more still the violations of the age statement that people seem to ignore this and get away with it more often. The stated distillation, I think, has become more widely known. I know Travis told me here recently, now that when you go to submit a cola label, there's a warning that pops up that has a warning about, does this meet the 5.36 stated distillation requirement?
Right.
So I think producers are realizing, okay, we can't do this anymore.
Right.
And enough lawsuits have happened. Tin Cup.
Right.
So I see less of that. It's still there,
mm-hmm.
but there's less of it.
So as the Ralph Nader of labels, do you feel like you influenced the TTP to implement that check?
I send emails occasionally to the TTB,
uh-huh.
and they always respond to me. But if I point out a particular case and I try to follow up on it, all the responses I'll ever get is, we'll take appropriate action as where needed, and it's a private matter that won't be disclosed to you. So whether I had any direct input into it is kind of a mystery.
Uh-huh.
I hope that I did.
There's no way you didn't. I mean, everybody knows, what it is that you do that's in the industry. And I've had the opportunity to bring your name up to several industry people, and I get one of two reactions, right? One is, oh yeah, he was very helpful. He pointed out this, that, and the other to us. And the other is just like sneers and angry glances. And so
I've also kind of changed my methodology. I mean, at first I just took to complaining about them online or complaining to the TTB. Here more recently, well, in the past couple of years, more of my approach now is to try to find a contact email
mm-hmm.
and send the company an email saying, hey, I just want to let you know,
right.
I'm not looking to get you in trouble, but this is the code, and other companies have gotten in a significant amount of trouble for violating these same sections. You might want to take a look at this.
Right.
So I try not to be such a dick. And sometimes companies will call me back, and I've had some very frank discussions, and I point out the exact code. I said, you can look this up on your computer while we're talking. I can hear them typing. I said, here's the code. It's the federal code. And they see that I'm not just making stuff up.
Right.
That what I'm talking about is actually the code when it comes to labeling, and people have changed their labels.
Right.
Other times, I get the response that I most often get is, well, the TTB approved my label already, so they say it's fine.
Right. So let's talk about that. So explain to the people what happens, what a cola approval is, right? Because I don't know that everybody knows that.
It's basically a process that the label of the spirit that you're going to bottle, it's the details of the information. You have to turn in a label to the federal government for approval. There's certain mandatory things like the government health warning. There's things about the company's names, obviously about the state of distillation. So there's a lot of check boxes that companies have to do to make a correct label. But the TTB basically will take a producer at their word on a lot of things. If a producer says this is an 11-year-old whiskey, the TTB doesn't go out to inspect that this is actually 11-year-old whiskey bottle.
Mm-hmm.
They take the producer's word on it. There is a section whenever you turn in a label that under penalty of perjury, that this label meets all federal requirements.
Sure.
That's what kind of gets these guys in trouble, is they really can't say just because my label approved, I'm all good, because they violated that section if they had a bad label, that they under penalty of perjury that it met it when it really didn't.
Right, right.
So TTB does have ways to go back and check these things, but up front they just take you at your word.
Right. And so that is the issue at hand, is that as a regulatory agency, they barely have enough resources just to process information requests.
I mean, their main function is collecting taxes.
Right.
Get that out of the way. I mean,
right.
That's really what their main role is. So.
And so their enforcement arm is extremely weak. And
it has been beefed up some here this past year. They did get some extra money and hired some agents out there. So
gotcha.
I find that interesting. Yeah, it is still what I think is weak. And what happened, obviously, 15 years ago, we had 10 distilleries making 99% of the whiskey out there in America.
Right.
And they submitted very few labels a year.
Right.
So it didn't require a lot of work. And it was really kind of a self-regulating industry. If Maker's Mark submitted a label that Jim Beam thought was bad, Jim Beam was going to go to the TTB and question it.
Right.
So it was kind of a self-regulating. The companies had a self-check on their own process.
Right.
But then the craft distillery boom happened.
Mm-hmm.
And now we have 4,000 craft distilleries out there.
Right.
And they're making multiple products. So the number of labels that have been turned in skyrocketed.
Right. I suspect that last year Balcones had more cola labels submitted than the industry did in its entirety in the 80s or 90s in a whole year. Right. Wow. So I had not ever considered that aspect, that all of a sudden they are overwhelmed, because it's easy as a consumer when you do find, bottles that are improperly labeled. And I don't know, you've forgotten more than I know about labeling laws, but I find labels that are incorrect all the time. Right. And I could see how, as a person that's responsible for getting the label approval at a producer, you would just go, well, they said it was okay. Who are you? Why would you know more than the person approving labels at the TTB?
The other thing to consider is these craft distillers, they're the ones that's turning in the bulk of the labels. The big companies have lawyers that look at these kind of things.
Right.
They're doing it internally. But a lot of these small guys, they're turning in labels themselves, and they're already dealing with a mound of other TTB information processes,
mm-hmm.
that taxes that they're dealing with TTB on a ton of other stuff that takes up a ton of their time.
Mm-hmm.
Labeling really is a small part of.
It was just one of many tasks they had to check off that day.
Right.
Right.
And so they don't know the code as well as they should. And
mm-hmm.
the codes they got to know and it's a big book.
Yeah.
And so labeling code is just one little section. So they're just not experts in it.
Yeah.
So sometimes there's a lot of honest mistakes made
Mm-hmm.
just because a producer really didn't understand the section of the code.
So that's an interesting question. So you find labeling mistakes all the time. How often, what percentage of the time do you think it is intentional for maybe some financial gain? And what percentage of the time do you think that it is accidental?
I think it's shifted. I think 6-7 years ago, it was a lot for financial gain.
Mm-hmm.
I think companies have become more aware of the regulations. There's less opportunities for that, but I still probably think it's probably 70% accidental and 30% for financial gain. If I had to just guess a percentage.
Gotcha. And so you talked a little bit about when you you used to just go online and kind of put them on blast. You would comment on news articles, things like that, and that would get someone's attention. But you've started reaching out to companies. So typically, what's that process look like? So well, I guess you kind of talked about that. I'm getting confused about what we talked about at lunch and what we talked about here. And so you send an email, you get someone on the phone, and you're showing them the section of the code. What percentage of the time do you feel like they're going, "Oh crap, thank you, I'll get right on this," and what percentage of the time are they just dismissive and rude? Because I've seen a couple public spats between you and producers, and one of them, I'm friendly with the producer, and I PM'd the guy when I saw that he was demanding that you not say something, and I PM'd him, and I'm like, "Don't argue with Wade. You're gonna be wrong. Just don't argue with Wade."
Well, I will say, as much as I've called out companies, I've never been sued for slander or libel.
Because you're never wrong.
Well, I'm never wrong about this stuff. I'm actually, when I call someone out about the fact, uh, I know my facts of what they're doing. Right now it's kind of more confusing. I used to be able to spot a fake Texas whiskey label pretty easy.
Yeah.
But now we've had companies making whiskey for 10 years. We have some producers that can have very large volume quantities. So they can source whiskey from within
Inside
Texas.
yeah.
And so therefore they don't have to have that stated distillation because it was actually distilled
Texas,
here. Yeah. So now it's actually a lot more harder for me to pinpoint an issue with the label because of this.
Sure.
So, and if I'm not 100% certain, I wouldn't call someone.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's interesting. And now that we've got Gulf Coast coming online with their huge production capacity.
Well, they've been making whiskey there 2.5 years.
Right.
They greatly increased their production capacity here more recently. So the big column sales that they put in.
So do you ever get paid as a consultant to help people put together a colo approval that's going to be compliant?
I've never formalized the business. I have had help people with labeling.
Mm-hmm.
Typically, I've gotten a bottle
of
spirit. I got a bottle of rum up there with a guy who helped with. Ed Blake gave me an old Baldy too for helping him with some labeling issues.
Yeah. But nothing formal.
I had a dinner bought for me, but I've never made it a cash transaction.
Gotcha. Well, that makes sense.
I thought about doing it, but with that whole issue, I don't want to get in trouble of giving legal advice when I'm not a lawyer. So.
No, that's fair. Yeah. Well, part of the reason why I ask is it just seems silly, right? Because to me, if there's a guy that's it's almost like the other day I was releasing a podcast that was about basically labeling laws. And I sent it to you and I said, "Will you just watch this and make sure I didn't screw it up?" Because here's the thing. I knew you were going to watch it and you were going to bust my ass publicly in the Facebook group if I was wrong. And so it just made sense for me to show it to you before I, publicly messed up. And I wondered why more producers didn't do that. Right. And it probably takes you 2 seconds to review a colo approval and determine whether or not it's what it is, what it needs to be. Right.
I've done several things with Texas whiskey members of the Texas Whiskey Association. Had people reach out for me, buy some, help them come in their label, and I'm happy to do any of the Texas whiskey members.
Right, for free. Because you are the compliance officer for the Texas Whiskey Association, right?
That's my
official title. Yeah. So they should be able to get some help from you. So you have, I'm just curious, were you involved in that labeling fiasco with the bourbon mash?
The Crown Royal.
The Crown Royal bourbon mash?
Yeah, somewhat.
Yeah.
I had written Biagio about it.
Uh-huh.
This is the one I guess you can bring back, but Biagio, we couldn't think of it.
Yeah.
Earlier, but I had written Biagio about it, never got a response. So I don't know if I had any impact, but I'm the one that broke the story on my Tater Talk blog that I noticed that the label had been surrendered when I was looking at colas online.
Right.
So then I contacted Biagio about that. I said, why was this label surrendered? And found out the story of why it was. And someone complained, or maybe it was my complaint. But anyway, the TTB made them withdraw the label and gave them permission, though, to use up any existing labeled stock.
Right.
So, but that was a year and a half ago, and I still see those bottles out there.
Sitting on the shelf.
How much stock did they have? I don't know.
Right. Well,
but officially, they also had to put some signs up, some verbiage on the boxes and things that said this is not bourbon.
Right. Right.
If people don't know, Crown Royal is a Canadian whiskey. Bourbon can only be made in America. They tried to label a product, Crown Royal Bourbon Mash Whiskey, and they were implying that it was made from a mash bill that was equivalent to bourbon, but you really can't put the word bourbon anywhere on a product label that wasn't made in America.
Right, right. And so I saw that got changed, and I thought that you might have something to do with that. So kudos to you, protecting American whiskey from them Canadians.
And I've tried that bourbon mash Canadian whiskey. It really wasn't bad.
I've had it. It's fine.
I think it was one of the better Crown Royal products I've had.
Yeah, I'm sure. I tried it. I thought it was just fine. So, I mean, it tasted like a younger basic bourbon, but it was it was good enough.
So a lot of my calling out, I'll say issues about labeling, and people think that I'm saying that the product's bad, and that's not what I'm saying.
Right.
And I'm not most of the time not commenting on the quality of one of these products when I take on the labeling issue. Those are two separate things.
Right, right. So you've reached out to a number of companies. What would you consider some of your larger success stories where they were grateful and made changes that you felt like were good for the consumers?
I mean, the Biagio one, if that was because of me, I don't know if it was. Timber Creek over in Florida had some labeling issues that they changed after me.
What are some of the more things that stick out in your mind where things went terribly awry and it didn't turn out so good?
Oh gosh, you want me to say Bourbon 30, don't you?
I'm just curious if that's one that sticks out in your mind.
Oh yeah, they told me to go stick it.
Yeah. Well, Jeff is not known for his gentleness, so that does make sense. Any others that you have animus towards because they didn't do what you knew they were supposed to do?
Yeah, but I can't talk about
it. You can't talk about those guys? You don't want to get a cease and desist?
Well, when I became a member involved with the Texas Whiskey Association,
I've heard about this.
Did sign a pledge not to
say anything negative
about any Texas whiskey brand. So, and I do take that seriously. So
one of the things that I've learned about you is that you have a moral line that you will not cross. And you try to hold everyone else to that same moral line. And you can be very indignant when they don't do what you know to be moral. Is that fair to say?
I mean, I would say it's definitely fair to say that I have some moral things that I try to follow. I don't like the instant flippers of guys buying bottles and then flipping them out in the parking lot.
Right.
And, I call out some of that kind of behavior.
Sure.
I call that taterish.
And
I'm sure that irritates some people, but I don't care.
Right.
Obviously we kind of talked about this today at lunch, but crotch shots I find are just silly. I'm surprised women aren't offended by those sometimes.
Right.
It's nothing I would ever do.
For those of you who don't know, it's popular to get a nice bottle of whiskey, get to your car, and hold it in your lap while you take a picture. But it's gone a little bit too far, and they've started making it look like a phallic type thing. Some whiskey clubs ban crotch shot photos. Some don't, but Wade is extremely against them. There was a hilarious instance where one of our, well, he wasn't an admin at the time, but one of our admins from Someone Say Whiskey had just stepped down because he had, too much going on. And I guess he posted a crotch shot photo or something. You jumped his case about it, and y'all argued, or you argued with him somewhere in a over crotch shot photo. You blocked him, and then he made a game of getting you to unblock him.
He tagged me. He had people tag me in all these posts.
Yeah, and so what he did was, we had a fundraiser going on that supported disabled veterans and children, and he said he did a side thing that he was going to give away a rare bottle of whiskey, something like that, to the people who made a special donation. But not only did you have to make a donation, but you also had to post a crotch shot photo, and you had to tag Wade Woodard in it.
It's funny. It was all in good fun.
It was all in good fun, and we raised a little bit of money. And Wade, showing that he was a good sport, took his own crotch shot photo and made his own donation.
The one and only time I did it, just for that,
just for the good cause. So
the other thing I like to see people do, instead of posting all these trophy shots of your fall allocated bottles, which right now in that season, take them home, open them up, have a glass of it, post a picture of that.
Mm-hmm.
I much more appreciate someone actually drinking these bottles than just treating them like a trophy.
Sure. Yeah, I feel the same way. So you are pretty active in the online whiskey forums. And when I told people that I was going to come and interview for my podcast, the most common request was, "Hey, can you ask him why he's such a dick?" And I was like, I don't know if I should do that. But
are you asking?
I'm asking. So what would be your response to somebody who thinks you're a dick in the online forums?
I'm not so much of a dick as is that I'm blunt.
Okay.
And I'm a bad typist.
Okay.
So I don't like to type long, complicated answers that addresses your bourbon feelings.
Uh-huh.
I'm just going to get right to the point, and here it is. And sometimes that offends people. I get that. But, I'm usually right.
Sure.
And if I'm wrong, I'm the first to admit it.
Well, you and I have had that discussion before where I literally said to you, I said, I know that you're right, but you don't have to be a dick about it. One of the things that you've spent a lot of time, energy, and effort just being a consumer advocate, right? But sometimes I feel like your mission can be sidetracked by the way that you deliver the information, because the very people that you're trying to help, you sometimes alienate with the way that you address the information. And so I got curious about, well, maybe there's certain segments of the community that he cares more about than others, right? Because there's a lot of new entrants into the whiskey community nowadays. And so it can be frustrating for somebody who's been involved in the community for years, and somebody goes, "Do you know how I can get Blanton's?" Or, whatever the newbie question is, right? So how do you feel about the new people that are getting into whiskey? Do they irritate you? Are you glad they're here? Is it a necessary evil? How do you feel?
I'm all for them getting into whiskey.
Okay.
I wish they learned how to use that search button, because they ask the same questions every day.
Right. Right.
Does that not frustrate you? Have in your group having the same post over and over again?
It does, but I don't mind. Well, and I'm trying to create, educational resources that are easily consumable, that are broken down by, category. And then I can just point them back to it. Right. And just go, here you go. Here's the answer to your question.
In Houston Bourbon Society, Todd Grubb, and I helped him with it, created a frequently asked question, big long document. But the time we answered all the questions, it turned out to be like 17 pages long.
Yeah.
But they're all answered in there if someone wants to take the time. But
right. Sure.
most people doesn't seem to want to take the time to read a 17-page document.
So have you contemplated maybe softening up your approach a little bit just to make your information you're distributing?
I am who I am.
And that's just how it is. Take it or leave it. Because that's basically what you said to me when I asked you to soften up your approach in our group. You're like, you're not going to change me.
Of course, you're the opposite. You're the most softly, let's all get along and feel good type person there is.
That's true. Yeah. And somehow people still think I'm an asshole, which I'm so I literally ask myself every time a flare up happens and everyone gets all mad and starts talking all kinds of crazy shit about me. I'm like, how is Wade Woodard like over here stirring up all of the, bees and I'm over here getting stung? I'm the one that's like trying to be nice and gentle and be all inclusive and bring everybody in and not get frustrated when you ask the same damn question that everybody asks every day.
We probably are both on the opposite side of the spectrum where we need to be. So,
Maybe I need to be more to the center. And
if we had a baby, it would probably be ideal.
It'd be ideal for whiskey community.
Or maybe we counterbalance each other. Okay.
That could be it.
We're pretty opposites on a lot of topics.
Well, let's talk about that.
We haven't even talked about politics.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not
on here. No. So one of the things that I wanted to ask you about is you have some pretty strong opinions about pricing. And I've seen you, make comments about, this bourbon is not worth this amount, all of that stuff. And I am a pure capitalist when it comes to, my fiscal views. I think that the system, it does have moments of chaos for sure, but that it always balances itself out, right? So long as the consuming public knows what it is that they're buying. If they want to pay that amount of money for it, let them do it. And if and soon as a company starts trying to manipulate, or isn't allowing market forces to set prices, things go terribly awry. Look at Pappy Van Winkle. They should have been raising their prices all along the way when their bottles started to get allocated and all of that stuff. And we could have a whole debate about why that hasn't happened. Personally, I think it's Sazerac trying to use Pappy influence so that they can use it as an inducement for retailers to create other brands like, Wheatley Vodka and Fireball back in the day. And it's worth too much to them to build those other brands with the influence they get with those Pappy bottles. That's my personal opinion. But we do know that when the price is not in balance with supply, things get chaotic. And so why not let the market do that? Why rail on companies that change their prices? Why rail on companies that release a product at a price that's higher than what you think it should be?
Because I'm a consumer. There's two sides to. I'm a proud American capitalist pig.
Okay.
I'm with you with this. I'm not saying they don't have the right to price these products at whatever they want. They definitely do. But the flip side of that is consumers are allowed to complain about it and to not buy it and try to exert influence on other people to do the same. I made a New Year's resolution last December, which I've honored this entire year, that I would not buy a over $100 bottle of whiskey that was a source product.
Okay.
When you have a source product, there's an extra layer of markup there in addition to your wholesaler and retailer. And what I found most often is that you can buy those same whiskeys from the producers at a much more reasonable markup.
Mm-hmm.
So I encourage people to buy directly from the producers rather than from these source companies, especially when the pricing levels are getting too high. And now these companies that are sourcing the whiskey will come back and argue, well, it's because the only way that we can buy barrels now is the price is so high that we have to, by the time we mark it up, it's above $100 a bottle of whiskey.
Mm-hmm.
And my point to that is, well, if the price is so high, you shouldn't be buying those barrels to begin with.
Right.
You know, the producers now are in control. They can sell it and make it themselves a killing on it on a per bottle price.
Mm-hmm.
The only reason they would sell this whiskey to a third party bottler as if they're going to make a crazy amount of money.
Right.
So, and then as a consumer, it's not a very good value proposition.
Sure.
Yeah, you get a unique label and brand, but it's not really a unique whiskey.
Sure.
I mean, I can buy the Dickel 14-year-old bottled and bond product for $32.
Right. Right.
I bought over a case of it.
Mm-hmm.
I like Dickel, always have. But why would I want to buy Bourbon Pursuit or a barrel product that's basically the same whiskey, and they're charging $90 to $100?
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I point out oftentimes to consumers is, be wise with your money.
Sure. Well, and I think that's fair. I just, I'm such an advocate for small business that when I see somebody complaining about, somebody's pricing, I'm like, if you don't like it, just move on. You can tell people that you don't want to pay that amount of money, and you can even tell people why you don't want to pay that amount of money. But when you start telling people that they shouldn't pay that amount of money is where I'm like, I don't know. That feels a little weird to me.
You're in touch with your bourbon.
And, it's my bourbon feelings. That's fair.
Yeah. That's, I think a lot of these groups should be renamed bourbon feelings groups rather than.
Did you see the book, the Bourbon Feelings Journal?
I didn't.
Yeah, somebody made a book.
Somebody already made this
for your bourbon fillings. Yeah. So let's talk about, since we're talking about pricing, let's talk about the secondary market. How do you feel about the secondary market? Are you glad it got, BSM got shut down? Do you feel like that was good for the industry?
It didn't really get shut down though, did it?
It didn't.
It diverged into 100 other new groups.
Right. It's like that wolf spider that you spray it and then the babies scatter everywhere. It was just like that. Yeah.
It's a law of supply and demand. As long as you have a willing buyer and a willing seller that can agree on a mutual price,
it's going to happen.
It's going to happen. I know technically it is illegal. Let's get that out of the way.
Right.
I'm not arguing that it's illegal.
But do you think it's good for the industry?
I thought BSM got too big and too public. It had 60,000 people. Anybody could search that group and join it. And it drew too much attention to itself.
Mm-hmm.
And, it imploded.
Right.
Took out some other groups with it. I don't know if I really love it or not.
Mm-hmm.
I have sold some bottles myself
mm-hmm.
That I bought way back in the day, and the prices that I got out to, I looked at that bottle and said,
I don't want it that bad.
I can't really justify opening that.
Right.
But to be fair, I never bought that to flip it. I wasn't an instant flipper. They're things that I've held for years.
And so that's your.
But if the whole thing went away tomorrow for good,
mm-hmm.
and everything went back down, there was no secondary value, I'd be perfectly happy drinking those bottles out of my bunker.
Sure.
So if it went away, I'm fine with it. If it keeps going, I'm fine with it.
But you dabble in it a little bit, but you see, I always thought that it was good for the industry, right? Because as I said earlier, when we were talking about pricing, when supply and demand are out of whack with one another and it creates chaos, well, the secondary market is trying to fix that, but it also gives the producers a way to look and see, how much demand is there? How much room is there to run on this pricing? Can we afford to invest more in capital or more capital into production equipment, right?
I mean, and no doubt that's why we've seen some of these price increases is producers looked out there and saying, oh, Heaven Hill, $11 bottle, 6-year-old white label is selling for $45 on the secondary market. I can have that profit.
Sure.
I know that's what happened, right?
Right. So. But we need those things to happen as consumers for them to put the money into the business that's going to bring the supply back up to where it needs to be so everybody can buy what they want.
Oh, well, the supply is going to far exceed demand.
Okay, let's talk about that. You feel like there's a downturn in the bourbon market coming?
No, I just think that capacity has grown so much.
Mm-hmm.
Each of these major distillers, and this is not talking even about all the volume of the craft distillers that are bringing on board, but each of these distillers realize that they're short of product. And so they've all doubled capacity.
Mm-hmm.
But if only one of them did it, it probably could have caught up.
Right.
But they've all
doubled it. Yeah.
Now it takes really 6 to 8 years for Kentucky and Indiana bourbon to become mature. So it's not going to be instant. But I definitely think because of these capacity growths that we are going to have a excess capacity. And the way I'll back this up is I've studied discus numbers for cases of American whiskey sales. And since 2010, so the past 10 years, how much do you think actual cases have gone up percentage-wise?
I would have no idea. 50%?
50%?
I'm guessing.
It's way less than that.
Okay.
It's like 18% actual growth. But it only took, because they didn't have that extra bottle, it doesn't take much to make demand go way up. So, I mean, supply get off balance with demand when you got a project that takes 6 to 8 years to age.
Right. So does that mean that you're predicting another collapse of the bourbon market like we saw in the 70s?
I wouldn't go so that far. I mean, I think demand is still going to keep growing as new people come into a hobby, but we will reach a certain point. I was around during the cigar bust in the early 2000s. You remember that? Have you ever studied that at all?
No. Can I get some whiskey?
Yep. Everybody that there was jumped on board and was producing cigars, and they were all sourcing it. And you had ton of celebrity cigars. Well, quality went downhill, prices went sky high, and it just busted. The market fell apart, and sales went down like 80% in a year. I don't think whiskey's going to be that way. But what I think will happen is producers, Weller could become age stated again 7 years, because I think they'll start having more whiskey than they have sales. So then they start aging it longer. Right. So they just hold on to it. So that's one way they can adjust their supply, is to have older whiskey available.
Right.
So will demand eventually kind of catch up with this? I don't know, but I think definitely that the double-digit price increases will end. I think we'll see more of some value bourbons introduced by the major producers.
Well, I hope so. I know it can't continue like this forever. And I was listening to some podcast the other day, and they were predicting that the current bourbon boom was going to last for at least another 20 years. And I don't see how, with all of the production capacity increases that we've seen all across the market, craft distilleries, all of the large infrastructure projects that have gone on, like Kentucky Owl. There's
I don't think Kentucky Owl will even build that facility.
You don't think so?
It's never broken ground.
Huh.
So well, it was announced over.
But there's still several other like huge producers that have come online in Kentucky. Everyone's increasing capacity. I honestly think that there's going to be a glut of supply, and that prices are going to have to come back down. But I know a lot of, I mean, you almost have to, in my mind, as somebody has a financial background, it's like the people that are spending $160 million, they probably have some financial advisors that have access to better data and are smarter than me. But I just don't see how it's possible that you could have all this increase in capacity and we don't end up with too much whiskey. I just don't know.
I think they're all expanding, thinking I'm going to be the one to capture that market.
Right.
Yeah, and they're all thinking that way, and the reality is they can't all do it. So we'll see.
It's going to be winners and losers. So, as somebody who is as interested in the laws that affect the producers and the whiskey industry as a whole, how do you feel about the 3-tier system that the producer cannot sell direct to the consumer with very few exceptions? Are you happy with it? Would you like to see that change?
I'd love to see it change. We talked a little bit of this earlier, but I spent my career in sales of electrical and telecommunication products, and I worked for manufacturers, and the companies I worked for pretty much exclusively sold through distributors then to the end customer. So we had a tier type system. But the big difference is this was voluntarily.
Right.
This is how we did it. We chose to go to market that way. Distributors provide a role in the marketplace. They provide local stock. They extend credit. They deliver products to the customer. There's value there. right? Even if the 3-tier system went away,
Mm-hmm.
the wholesalers middlemen would not go away.
No.
Okay, they would still be there. So I don't think we needed to have it legally mandated. I think we should take that away and let the system work itself out in a free market capital-based system that it would.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, you know, big, huge volume customers, say like Minute Maid Stadium, the Astros or the Rangers play, where they're going through huge volumes of booze.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe Diageo would say, "Hey, you know what? We're taking that account direct.
Mm-hmm.
We'll have to provide deliveries, but you wholesaler, you can have all the local bars and things like this."
Right.
That's how most other situations in the business world work.
Right.
So I would prefer to see that happen, but that would also allow the craft distillers to sell a lot more product on their own directly to customers.
Mm-hmm.
We did fortunately have a law change in Texas that allow, 2 bottles
Per 30
days, but there is a cap on that as far as total gallons
Mm-hmm.
that some producers are going to start bumping into, which is kind of the problem. And if you have the multiple products, you're up at Iron Root and they have 6 whiskeys and you want one of each.
You can't.
You can't.
You got to pick 2.
Yeah, so I'd much rather see that go away and have that open.
Yeah. And so what do you think is the driving force behind keeping that in place?
The wholesalers, they're big, powerful companies.
Yeah. They've been in place basically since post-prohibition, and they've had a monopoly. And it just doesn't make any sense to me. And here was the argument that I made. Same argument that you made, right? If we got rid of the mandatory 3-tier system, the wholesalers would not lose their business because, Jim Beam is not going to buy trucks to drive whiskey to a liquor store in Houston. They have a role to play, but that role is completely unnecessary for small producers that can only make enough whiskey to satisfy the local demand. And they're not even really allowed to market their own product, right? They've changed some of those rules now. They can go to Class B accounts without the distributor there and all that. And I know that that was not an enforced rule, but it just makes so much more sense to let the market shake out who the winners and the losers are going to be. And then once somebody gets large enough that they need that distribution help, then let the distributor earn their business, right? Let the distributors fight it out.
Hey, we finally agree on something.
We finally agree.
Let me pour some whiskey.
We should cheers on that.
We can have a toast to that.
And so you've gotten involved with the Texas Whiskey Association. Tell the people about that.
Well, the Texas Whiskey Association, we have 17 members distilleries, and we've set up a definition of what a certified Texas whiskey is. Our definition, by the way, mirrors the federal standard, so we're not inventing new laws. But for the guys that were really making whiskey here together in Texas from grain to glass, we wanted to have an association that protects their image and does a lot of consumer education about what certified Texas whiskey is. And to that regard, this spring we launched the Texas Whiskey Trail, which is a subsidiary of the Texas Whiskey Association. And so as you visit our member distilleries, you can check in on your phone and complete tasks and earn some prizes. We have some different tiers of memberships. So we have a free level if you just want to check it out and visit a few, and then maybe you'll think about upgrading, but it's free to get started. So
yeah. So check out the. Did they go to Texas Whiskey Trail, or did they go to Texas Whiskey Association to get their?
We have a link from the Texas Whiskey Association, but I believe if you Google either, it'll be in the first page of the results.
Yeah, it'll take you out.
I don't have the website memorized in front of me. I'd have to look at my computer bookmark.
That's okay. So what do you hope the long-term effect of the Texas Whiskey Association is going to have on the market? What are the goals that you were motivated to get involved because you thought that it was going to make a difference?
Well, I mean, my initial involvement was going back to what I was doing when I was calling out some of the fakers in the market was.
Right.
And, that's how I really, I went to work for Dan for a couple of years, Dan Garrison for a couple of years, because he saw what I was doing, was happy with it. So, I talked to him back then about doing this. this is a tough association to bring together because all these people are competitors,
Right.
in one regard.
Yeah.
But they finally realized if they were really going to compete and make Texas whiskey something that's well known as Kentucky bourbon, which that's really our goal, is to make Texas whiskey known worldwide as a high class, some of the best in the world type whiskeys. So we needed to have an association come together to do that. So that's really the goal.
Right. And by banding together, I feel like they're more able to exert influence over the laws that affect them than they have been able to do in the past, because as individuals, they didn't have the time, energy, money, and resources to send somebody to, Austin to advocate for producers. But the wholesalers did have those resources. The retailers have trade associations that do have those resources. And so I'm hopeful that the Texas Whiskey Association will not only maintain quality standards and make sure that consumers are protected, that there's truth in labeling, that when they purchase a product, they're getting what they expected, but that also, as them banding together, they'll be able to influence changes that are going to be better for the Texas producer market. So I'm hopeful about that. And we got an event to go to tonight too.
We
so
do.
that's
Gulf
good.
Coast Distilleries probably be over.
It'd be, this is going to air for weeks, but yeah, you can always check out to see what trail events are. I know they have a Facebook page, so you can go and like the Facebook page and check out their events page and see what's coming up. But they've always got something going on. And so if you want to get involved, you can go there. So, and then
one of the nice things about this association is we had some of our members that came on board that initially weren't meeting some of all the requirements of the federal labeling code, but realized they needed to be a part of this association and wanted to be on the Texas Whiskey Trail. And it was worth it to them to make those changes. So now they are, and now they're members, and it's a win-win for us and for consumers to know what whiskeys they're really buying.
Exactly. That's awesome. So if people want to get more information about you,
I do have a blog. It's tater-talk.com. And I'm on Facebook quite a bit. You're welcome to send me a friend request or a message. I try to answer any questions I get.
He's extremely active. So if you get on there, he will interact with you. So just be prepared to be told the truth in very short order, because that's what he does.
And I won't hold your hand about your bourbon filling while I'm telling
while
it.
You're doing it. And if you want more information about Bourbon Real Talk, you can get that at bourbonrealtalk.com. You can follow us on Facebook and Instagram /Bourbon Real Talk. And you can search for us on YouTube. And it would be awesome if you would subscribe and review on whatever podcast player that you consume podcasts on, and on YouTube, because the algorithm does not show the podcast to people unless I get reviews and subscriptions. It's just the way that it works, people. So if you were unsure when you woke up this morning if anyone loved you, just know that I love you, and I'll see you next time. Bourbon Real Talk.